you will salute the colonel. Now. The voice doesn't echo, it strikes. Not loud, not angry, just wrong. The words come from a Turkish aide-de-camp in ceremonial greens, standing beside a visiting colonel whose chest is weighed down with ribbons, medals, and the expectation that authority travels with him. They stand 5 paces from the wrought-iron gates of Windsor Castle. And directly in front of them, unmoving and expressionless beneath the tall bearskin hat, is a single royal guard. He does not blink, he does not speak, he does not move, but what happens next stuns everyone within earshot. You probably shouldn't be watching this. It's the kind of moment diplomats pray doesn't go viral. The kind of moment military manuals forgot to include. The kind of moment where one wrong eyebrow can become an international headline. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of tension-filled storytelling. Where are you watching from, and what uniform means most to your family? Now breathe slow, stand tall, and let's step into tonight's confrontation. The wind is light. There's a scent of roses blooming just behind the iron fence. And still, the air is thick with something else entirely. Protocol. To those unfamiliar with ceremonial postings, the guard looks like a statue. But for anyone who's worn the red tunic, who stood 12-hour rotations without a flinch, they know this silence is deliberate, calculated, a centuries-old answer to a very modern mistake. The Turkish colonel says nothing. He doesn't need to. His aide repeats the command again, sharper this time. I said, salute the colonel. Still, the guard does not move, not because he can't, but because he mustn't, you see. British royal guards are not trained to respond to the chain of command outside their own structure. They do not obey foreign orders. They do not break bearing, especially not at Windsor. And they certainly do not salute someone who arrives unannounced, uninvited, and assumes protocol bends to presence. It's a common misunderstanding. In some militaries, a display of rank transcends borderlines. But in the household division, tradition is the border. And here, you don't earn a salute, you receive it through recognized channels. The colonel narrows his eyes, perhaps assuming the silence is disrespect. Perhaps not understanding that the absence of motion is the statement. The aide steps closer, too close. He's already breached the 3-foot perimeter. But just before his boot heel crosses the final paving stone, a gloved hand extends, not from the guard, but from a castle steward. Sir, the steward says with careful polish. The guard will not respond to direct orders outside the British chain of command. The colonel says nothing. He turns slightly toward the crowd. Tourists have begun filming. Someone whispers in Turkish. A tense breath is drawn. This, right here, is the dangerous part, because it's not the silence that creates conflict. It's how people interpret the silence. And in that moment, beneath the gaze of 100 bystanders and centuries of empire, one man's assumption meets another man's oath. The colonel adjusts his cuffs. It's a quiet act, but one of control. Then, without a word, he nods to his aide, and both step back. But the weight of that moment does not lift. It hovers, it stares back, and it leaves a question unanswered. Was it restraint or rebuke? No one speaks. Not the crowd, not the castle staff, and certainly not the guard. He remains still, his rifle steady, his eyes forward. But if you look closely, there's a vein in his temple pulsing with pride. Light humor arrives from the oddest places. An American tourist leans to a friend, phone still recording, and says, "Is that the king? Why won't he wave?" Another responds, "No, that's just British for good morning." Even tension makes room for misinterpretation. But here's what matters. Just 20 seconds of stillness, and already military values are colliding. To the Turkish Gendarmerie, this could feel like insubordination. To the Royal Guard, any motion would be betrayal. That's the paradox of ceremony. Everyone sees the same silence, but no one hears it the same way. And somewhere in that heavy pause, the stage is set for something far bigger than a missed salute. Because pride didn't step forward today, it stood still, unshaken.
The colonel's boots click twice as he pivots, neither fast nor slow, just exact. That's the thing about senior officers. They learn early that power doesn't always need a shout. Sometimes it's all in the turn, the way you leave a challenge unanswered for now. The aide, however, wears his indignation more openly. His mouth is tight, his fists tighter. He stares at the guard with the look of a man not used to being ignored. But this is no ordinary square. This is no street parade or bilateral drill. This is the front face of a living fortress, Windsor Castle. And the man before them, still as stone and twice as weighty, is not being rude. He is being royal. Behind him, the Union flag flutters. No wind is strong enough today to shift his frame. The moment ripples outward. Within minutes, a castle protocol officer appears, pinstripe trousers, clipboard held like a broadsword of soft diplomacy. "Colonel," he says calmly, "we may arrange a private reception if your delegation requires recognition." A pause. Translation filters through whispered Turkish. The colonel nods slowly. But recognition is not what's bruised here, it's pride. There's a myth in military circles that the British Royal Guard trains to ignore everything. Screaming tourists, loud brass bands, even fainting comrades. That's only partly true. They train to respond only to necessity. To the right cues, to the correct voice. And today, neither came. What the Turkish delegation failed to understand was this: a royal guard does not salute a foreign officer on British soil unless granted express orders through diplomatic channels. Not because of disrespect, but because of clarity. Clarity of command, clarity of chain, clarity of centuries. Saluting out of context can signal obedience. And obedience in the wrong moment can change headlines or, worse, boundaries. It's not pomp. It's not arrogance. It's an ancient defense mechanism. You don't bend the rules of posture when those rules are written in blood, parchment, and 400 years of quiet defiance. Nearby, a pigeon lands briefly on a railing. Even it seems hesitant to interrupt. The guard remains still. But now his presence feels like protest. Not political, but ceremonial. Somewhere deeper in the courtyard, a bell chimes. It's not for them, but it reminds everyone that time is still passing, even if no one here is willing to take the first step. The colonel's second in command, a younger man with softer shoulders and sharper English, leans over. He means no offense, he offers. He thought it would be a moment of solidarity. Ah, there it is, the misunderstanding in full bloom. In some cultures, salutes are gestures of camaraderie across uniforms, a way of saying we are all men of service. But here, on these stones, it's not just service. It's sovereignty. And sovereignty isn't shared over gestures. It's acknowledged in silence. An odd bit of trivia floats up. In 1853, during the Crimean War, British and Turkish troops fought side by side. It was one of the few times their boots struck the same soil as allies. One historian even noted that Turkish officers admired the British knack for silence in battle. They called it the still storm. How quickly memory fades, and how easily assumptions fill its place. The guard adjusts nothing. He simply is, a living statue, a crimson warning label written in posture. And yet he is aware of everything. He notices the stiffness in the aide's jaw. He sees the colonel's hand rest briefly on the hilt of his sword, not in threat but in habit. He hears the child whisper behind the fence, "Daddy, why won't he talk to them?" Even silence, after all, has an audience. A small joke lands nearby, whispered by a local guide. Turkey may bring the heat, but Britain brings the freeze. The Americans laugh, the Germans smirk. Even one French tourist raises an eyebrow in appreciation. But the Turkish aide hears it. His ears are too tuned to disrespect today. And that's the danger with tension. Once lit, it burns everything that even resembles a spark. Back near the roses, the colonel finally exhales. He steps forward once more, not to confront, to understand. He looks at the guard, not as a subordinate but as a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, he sees it, the centuries of discipline carved into every breathless moment. Then, for the first time, he speaks softly. "Your silence is powerful." No reply, but perhaps for the first time, he doesn't expect one.
A single horse-drawn carriage rattles in the distance. Its rhythmic clatter feels out of place in a courtyard tense enough to snap steel. But the guard doesn't turn. He remains as before, upright, immovable, caught between earth and tradition. The Turkish colonel steps back, his lips pressed together in quiet recalibration. This is no longer about a salute. It's about decoding a culture that doesn't explain itself. The aide, however, still simmers. He mutters under breath, low Turkish. Bitter, he points to his own chest, to his badge, to his years of rank. But rank here is irrelevant without relevance. Suddenly, the unexpected. The Turkish lieutenant, young, clean-shaven, medals earned not inherited, raises his hand in a textbook salute. Sharp, respectful. His posture speaks where words can't. He doesn't wait for permission. He salutes the guard. A small gasp from the crowd, an audible click from a nearby camera lens. This, no one rehearsed, no manual predicted, and the royal guard, he responds. Not with a salute, but with a half nod, barely perceptible. Some miss it entirely. Others debate whether it happened. But those who saw it know that was not defiance, that was understanding. The nod was not protocol, it was acknowledgement. One man said, "I see you." The other replied, "I see you back." It's worth noting, the British Army does not forbid response to foreign military gestures. It merely restricts formal replies without prior arrangement. A nod, however, isn't formal, it's human. That small tilt of the helmeted head holds centuries of nuance. Not approval, not obedience, just recognition. And recognition in these moments is currency. The colonel turns to his lieutenant. Their eyes meet. No rebuke, no tension. Just a look that says, "You did what I could not." And behind it, an unspoken truth. Sometimes humility travels faster than rank. It brings to mind a lesson from Sandhurst, the UX Military Academy. Discipline is not silence. It is knowing when not to speak. The guard knows. The lieutenant just learned. And the colonel, he remembers. Because once, long ago, he too was the youngest in a courtyard, saluting a stranger, trying to make sense of uniforms that didn't match his textbooks. That's the strange beauty of military culture. Everything's rigid until it isn't. A child tugs on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, did he win?" The father hesitates, then answers carefully. "No, love, I think they both did." The camera keeps recording. The pigeons return, but the air has shifted, not warmer, not softer, just less sharp, like a blade placed gently back into its scabbard. The aide, still red in the ears, steps away. His pride may take longer to cool, but even he can't argue with what just passed. It wasn't rebellion. It was balance, between rules and reason, between pageantry and personhood. And that's the challenge of ceremony. Sometimes the unscripted gesture is the most correct one. A bit of quiet irony drifts in with the breeze. During the Ottoman Empire's peak, Turkish soldiers were known for elaborate courtesies before battle, tea offered to enemies, salutes given with poetic flair. Now, centuries later, it's the British side holding steady while the Turks reach across the aisle. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. A whisper passes through the spectators. Did the guard move? I think he nodded. Does that mean we're not at war? Someone laughs softly, and just like that, tension cracks, not in mockery, in relief. No one wanted a scene, but everyone watched one. And what they saw was this: a lieutenant saluting tradition, a guard nodding at humility, and a colonel choosing not to escalate. That is not weakness, that is strength. Strength without noise, without conquest, without a single word more than necessary. Somewhere near the outer wall, the Union flag catches more wind. Its flapping is louder now, like a distant applause. The moment is over, but the echo, that will linger.
Inside Windsor's south wing, the private reception room is cool, unadorned. Stone walls, tall windows, no portraits of monarchs glaring down. Just a large wooden table flanked by protocol officers and a silence that feels very different from the one outside. Here, posture softens. Metals clink faintly as officers unbutton coats. The colonel removes his gloves slowly, like peeling off the weight of expectation. Across from him sits a British liaison officer, older. Lean, uniform immaculate, demeanor unreadable. He does not rise. He simply offers, "Tea?" The colonel blinks, then, "Yes, thank you. It's not a question. It's not hospitality. It's ritual." The aide is absent, reassigned to logistics. A quiet suggestion from above. The lieutenant, however, is invited to sit. His presence is unexpected, but not unearned. The liaison speaks with the practiced elegance of someone who has diffused more than one parade ground misunderstanding. "Colonel, I understand your expectation, and I hope now you understand ours." The colonel nods. "The guard," he begins, "acted precisely as trained," the liaison finishes. No apology, but no scolding either, just acknowledgement, the currency of professionals. This is the confrontation no one sees. Not in viral clips, not in tabloids, not even in cables back to Ankara or Whitehall. Here, the real tension is dissected, not like a crime, but like a relic. The liaison gestures to a small display case on the wall. Inside, an 1815 officer's sword, its hilt wrapped in faded blue ribbon. Given by a Turkish commander to a British captain during the Battle of Waterloo, he explains. They never fought each other, but they saluted across the camp every morning for a week. The colonel leans forward. "It was returned?" "No," the liaison smiles faintly. "It was left on purpose." This is the heart of diplomacy between uniforms, not treaties, not speeches, but gestures, small ones, measured ones, ones that require silence to be heard. The lieutenant, still seated quietly, finally speaks. I only saluted because I hoped it would de-escalate, not provoke. The liaison turns to him. Lieutenant, you did something rare. The young man waits. You listened to stillness and answered in kind. In military academies, this would be turned into a case study, cross-national ceremony conflict resolved by controlled human gesture. But in reality, it's just men in uniform trying not to misstep on stones polished by centuries. Outside, the changing of the guard begins. A new face, same uniform, same silence. But this time, fewer eyes linger. The tension has been spent, like thunder already rolled across the sky. Inside, the colonel sips tea slowly. His shoulders are less rigid now. You know, he says softly, we still teach our cadets about Gallipoli. Your men fought fiercely. The liaison nods, and we remember your dead buried beside ours. The same soil holds both. It is not warmth, but it is truth, and in that truth, a peace forged not by agreement, but by the refusal to misunderstand each other one moment longer. A small joke arrives again, this time from the British side. Next time, Colonel, perhaps we compare medals after the tea, less risk to the guard's neck. The colonel chuckles. The lieutenant allows himself a smile. Even uniforms, it seems, enjoy irony. It's easy to forget that beneath badges and buttons are people. People raised on different stories, taught different meanings for the same gestures. A salute, a silence, a stare, a nod. Symbols that mean honor in one place, offense in another. But here, at this table, they've become something else entirely, a shared vocabulary written in restraint. And that may be the only language that truly travels. The meeting ends without ceremony. No handshake, no group photo, just a glance, a nod, and an understanding. The kind that needs no translator. Outside, the courtyard is nearly empty. The guard is back at his post. The pigeons too. And if you passed by now, you'd never know a diplomatic earthquake passed through these stones just hours earlier. Unless you looked closely, at the way the guard's boot heel now rests a fraction softer on the flagstone. At the way the tourists watch, not just to gawk, but to learn. And maybe, just maybe, at the way the lieutenant lingers a moment longer before rejoining his delegation, as if saluting once more, but this time only in his mind.
The guard moves. For the first time in hours, his right boot lifts just slightly, then lands back on the ancient stone with the kind of precision only years of ritual can deliver. It's not part of the official drill. It's not an order, but it is a decision. He begins to march, not toward the Turkish delegation, not away from them either. Simply forward on the prescribed patrol line across the quadrangle. His rifle remains shouldered, his gaze fixed, but something has changed. Because now the onlookers, smaller in number than earlier, do not reach out. They do not mock, they do not even wave, they watch, quietly, respectfully, curiously. Back at the stone railing, the colonel and his lieutenant observe. They speak no words, they share no looks, but they stay, just long enough to see the guard complete his pass. Just long enough to understand the silence earlier was not the end of an interaction. It was the beginning of one. This is the march without drums. There is no snare beat to signal victory, no trumpet to punctuate tension. Only boots on stone, only presence. And presence, when delivered with dignity, can say what 1,000 press releases never could. History has taught us that power speaks loudly, that force demands notice. But what if the real power lies not in confrontation, but in composure? What if the guard's refusal to move was the louder message all along? In the 17th century, Windsor's guard stood still through wars, plagues, invasions. One diarist wrote, "Though the world turned inside out, the guard remained unmoved, like stone but breathing." Today, that line lives again and breathes again, not because of war, but because of misunderstanding. And because one man in red chose not to flinch. The Turkish colonel finally exhales. He checks his watch. There is no urgency in the gesture. He speaks at last. To his lieutenant, "I think we witnessed something rare." The younger man replies without turning his head, "We witnessed discipline without provocation." A pause. "Would you have returned the salute?" The colonel considers, then shakes his head. "No, I would have waited." He glances toward the guard. "And that's why I still have something to learn." Behind them, the castle bells ring once, 12 chimes. Noon. A new guard is already on approach, identical in every detail, save one he hasn't witnessed what just unfolded. And so he steps into place with clean boots and unburdened silence. But perhaps, just perhaps, the echo of what came before still lingers in the stone. A small boy points at the guard and asks, "Is he the one who didn't salute?" His mother kneels beside him. No, she says. He's the one who stood still. The boy tilts his head. Why? Because that's what courage looks like sometimes. The delegation departs. No escort, no fanfare, just footsteps down a gravel path, but the mood has shifted. There is no tension, only something quieter, heavier, like honor recognized, even if never named. Near the chapel, a single guardsman on break removes his bearskin and wipes sweat from his brow. He hasn't heard the full story. He doesn't need to. He's already heard enough. There was a moment and the guard didn't flinch. That's all they'll say in the barracks. That's all they need to say. Because among guardsmen, stillness is a weapon, and wielding it well, that's the highest salute of all. As the sun begins its slow arc downward, casting long shadows across the castle stones, the courtyard empties. But for those who saw, those who truly saw, the silence still speaks. Speaks of pride, of restraint, of men who understand their uniforms don't make them great. Their choices do.
The courtyard settles, not into silence, but into meaning. The kind of meaning that doesn't need narration, or medals, or headlines, just memory. A guard still as a chapel pillar and a colonel walking away with his pride intact if slightly reassembled. No flags lowered, no apologies offered. And yet something was exchanged. Not gestures, not ground, but understanding. The kind that travels without passport, that lives in the tilt of a chin, the restraint of a foot, the dignity of not reacting when every instinct says you should. Outside Windsor, life resumes. The crowd disperses. The pigeons reclaim their perch. But inside a few hearts, Turkish, British, uniformed, civilian, a scene replays. Quiet, precise, unshakable. And in that replay there is no victor. Only men who stood their ground, one by stillness, one by gesture, both by honor. As mist begins to rise from the garden lawn, one final image remains, a red sleeve brushing softly against morning fog. Motionless, but not forgotten. Because sometimes the strongest salute is standing perfectly still.